Good morning, everyone. Folks are trickling in here. Give it just a minute. Lots of folks are joining us this morning, which is wonderful. Good morning, good morning. We'll get started in just 1 second here. So we will mute you as you come in, just so you know. All right, well, I think we can go ahead and get started. There's still a few folks popping in, which is great. Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for joining us this morning. My name's Louise Misztal. I'm Executive Director at Sky Island Alliance. I'm really thrilled to see so many of you. Oh, we've still got lots of folks coming in. Good morning, everyone joining. It's been a tumultuous week. So here we are to talk about what is going on right now with the border wall and what we can do about it. And we've got a lot of hope and big ideas with the change in administration. So we've got some good news and some news about the work we can be doing. And we've got a wonderful group of panelists here with us today, this morning. So I want to start by saying thank you for joining. It's wonderful to see so many people who care about this issue, and thank you to our supporters and donors who are here with us and our volunteers that make all of the work we're doing as an organization as Sky Island Alliance possible. We couldn't do it without you. And I want to, before we dive into the topic, I just want to acknowledge that our conservation work at Sky Island Alliance has been done for many years on native lands. Our Sky Island Alliance office is located in Tucson, where we are guests on the land of Tohono O'odham and Pascua Yaqui peoples. And our work throughout the Sky Island region stretches through land that many Native peoples call home, including but not limited to 22 federally recognized tribes in the state of Arizona. And some of those tribes' land stretches across what is now the US-Mexico border into Mexico. So now is a time for vigilance, I think, some hope and vigilance. And so what we're going to do today is talk about what's happening right now on the ground in some places in the Sky Island region where we are working and our partners are working to monitor wildlife and the conditions on the ground. And then we're going to also talk about actions that we can be taking going forward. We've got a really wonderful group of folks with us here today. Starting with Emily Burns, who's Program Director at Sky Island Alliance, and she has been developing and leading our border wildlife study to document wildlife in the path of the border wall and get their voices out into the world. Myles Traphagen is with us as well here today. He is the Borderlands Program Coordinator at Wildlands Network. He's been doing an incredible amount of work as well to monitor wildlife along the border region in the Sky Islands and beyond, and is an ecologist who's worked in this region for many years. And we also have Dinah Bear, who is a wonderful, knowledgeable resource. We're so glad to have her as part of this community here. She is professionally active in environmental law and policy with a long, distinguished career in environmental law and policy, including serving for many years as general counsel for both Democratic and Republican administrations at the President's Council on Environmental Quality. So she'll be helping us understand some of the policy issues, what's happened in the last couple days, and thinking about what needs to happen both in the short term and the longer term going forward. So we're going to start with Emily sharing a little bit about what we're seeing on the ground in recent weeks, particularly around the Patagonia and Huachuca Mountains, which is where Sky Island Alliance has a border wildlife study in place in this really important corridor. And then we're going to move to Myles to share some of his observations, and then to Dinah. Just a couple of logistics. We have you on mute, as I mentioned, to reduce distractions, but we welcome your questions. If you have questions as we move along, please put them in the chat box. We'll be monitoring that and we will try to work them in as we go. We will also have a question session. We'll reserve some time at the end to have a question session with folks. So please go ahead and put your questions in the chat box. We've also got some great questions that folks emailed in, so thanks for that. I think that's it. Unless there's anything else, Emily, I will hand it over to you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Louise. Thank you to everyone who's joining us to have this really important discussion and roundtable about where we are on the story of the borderlands and the wall and where we go from here. I want to just go ahead and share my screen, and I'm going to show you some images of what we've been observing. And I know for many of you who've been following these issues over time, you've seen a lot of what the wall actually looks like as it's going in on the ground, and has been, unfortunately, for a number of years. But I want to just tell you the story of what we're observing. And this is something that is unfolding on a daily basis. And even with the executive order that happened and that we are grateful for yesterday, we're still seeing construction activities on the ground. And that's sort of a theme of what we want to talk about today. To orient you to the landscape that I'm going to be focusing on, I'm talking to you today from Tucson, and 70 miles south of Tucson, we have the Patagonia Mountains. And to the east side, we have the Huachuca Mountains. We've been studying the wildlife community along this stretch of the US-Mexico border, both on the US side and in Sonora, using an array of wildlife cameras. And when we started this project, we knew that border wall construction was being discussed and planned for this entire stretch of where you see red dotted line. Starting in the summer, and I'll show you photographs, construction started on this eastern side, marching westward. And just in the last few days or weeks, we had construction begin on the western end of this region, moving eastward. And I'm going to show you images from both of those regions. Okay, so here's the first time that I went down to the border at Coronado National Memorial. This is on the eastern side of the Huachuca Mountain foothills. The Arizona Trail comes along these ridges and goes all the way down to the border just behind this ridge here. This is the Montezuma Pass. So there is old wall that's been here for a long time. It's the shorter 18-foot wall. But the construction activity that began in July of 2020 started marching up that hill in the distance. This is what it looked like prior to the construction in September of 2019. Oh, do you remember when it used to be green in Southern Arizona? It was so beautiful. It will happen again, I'm convinced. We have a little bit of rain coming in. This is the site just from last week with the 30-foot bollards going up, cresting over that Montezuma Pass. And so what I want to note here is that not only is it the footprint of the actual wall and the barrier that's being constructed that is going to massively stop a majority of wildlife species in this area, but there's been a tremendous amount of earthwork and moving. I'm not an engineer, so I'm not going to comment on the specifics of how the road network to support this construction has been designed, but I would say we are looking at multiple very steep, potentially unstable slopes associated with the construction sites. So as we think about work pausing, all of us are taking a moment to say, what is the status of each construction project and what immediate risks and further damage could happen when this work stops, or even if some pieces go to completion, how well secure are these slopes? What is the potential to restore and to do better by our public lands in these places? I'm going to show you on the next slide us going over the Montezuma Pass, dropping down from National Park Service land into Coronado National Forest. This is what this border infrastructure looked like on this western side of the Huachuca Mountains, just the Normandy style vehicle barrier and barbed wire fence. And then in the distance, this is a slope that had no border infrastructure at all going up towards the Montezuma Pass. This was November 2019. This summer, that changed pretty dramatically as public access was shut off, and you can see they began to carve in a border road up through that slope. Here's just a comparison of the type of road infrastructure. So it's not just the linear line where a wall would go. There's an extensive road network associated with all of this construction. This was the scene just 2 days ago. Continuing excavation, trucks moving up and down completely over the top of this one ridge. Cement was coming into this area on Tuesday, so the construction pace had really picked up. Our field team observed a rapid increase in construction activity, and the bollards were being brought in. Now we're going to jump over to the western side of our border wildlife study, where Tucson Border Wall Project B, the segment 5, was activated very recently. And this map that Myles made shows in the blue outline that this is designated critical jaguar habitat. So it's this stretch of dotted red and black border that now became an active construction project under new contracts. So here is a site from Saturday of what this brand new construction project in the final in the final days of the Trump administration, what this actually looked like on the ground. For many miles into the distance heading west, there had been existing border wall and it crosses the Santa Cruz River here. But all of the new area that you're seeing that looks gray is brand new bladed border construction. There's a slew of trucks, construction trucks from Fishel Sand and Gravel out on the site here on Coronado National Forest. I witnessed about, in the period of an hour, 6 tanker trucks carrying water, bringing water to spray down the road. You can see the water was being sprayed down just on the access roads leading towards the border. Bollards had been stacked and staged. Where the old wall ends on the right, the new bollards were being stacked up, ready to be put up on the eastern side of this area where the wall is being extended. And this is the dramatic scene that was really shocking for me, was to see just how wide of a border road they're putting in along the border. You can see the scale of the pickup trucks down here. So incredibly wide. Blading has been going across, heading west up into the foothills of the Huachuca Mountains. And one of the major concerns that we have, in addition to the loss of vegetation and habitat here, is how the sediment has been moved. The bulldozing that's happened is pushing sediment down into the bottom of the drainages, and we have not seen any evidence of culverts or water crossings being added. Another scene from above of what this construction looks like. There's a lot of cut and fill that's happening here in this area. Active bulldozers moving here on the eastern end. And then this is what the very tail end looks like. I'm happy to report that this line at the end on the eastern side of where they started bulldozing, it hasn't extended further east as of yesterday at 5 p.m. So bulldozers were still active throughout the day yesterday, but they were working on drainages and working on cut and fill in areas of the stretch of border slightly further west of this point. And here's just another image of the end of where they've been working. And again, they've just been pushing sediment down into drainages, which is one of the big watch spots for us. Okay. So we will come back to what we can do about all this. And I want to pass the baton in a moment to Myles to talk about how what I've shown you in detail on the ground, what that's looking at like at other parts of the border. But I want to say that it's never been more important for us to be tracking what's actually going on the ground, witnessing where construction activities continue. And there's a lot of questions that we still have about how each project will be handled in terms of the pause, when the pause stop work will start, and what continued construction activities might happen for each project. So we're going to be monitoring on the ground the activities that we see. We're going to be working on quantifying the construction footprint and identifying priorities for restoration. For those of you that are in the Southwest and know what happens when it rains, we get big pulses of water, and we're really concerned about further damage that could happen in these watersheds because of how the sediment's been moved around. So we'll be looking forward to working with the land managers, Coronado National Forest, the National Park Service, to identify these priorities on the ground. We certainly want to see a large regional coordinated response to identify the really critical priorities for restoration. But this is really a long game, and we're really at this hopefully wonderful tipping point where we can start to pivot towards restoration, but we're very much still in the thick of construction occurring in these places. So with that, I'll pass it to Myles to broaden the geographic scope here of what we know about border construction.
Thank you, Emily. Hello, everybody. It's a good day. Yesterday was a great day, and I think it's only going to get better. But as Emily said, we have to stay vigilant. So immediately after this call, I'm going to be heading down to the border to document if construction is still occurring, because last night there was a stop work order, a proclamation issued by President Biden, and there's a part in it that says as soon as possible they should pause construction, but up to 7 days. And what I see with that is that we need to document, are they still cutting into land? Are they still doing heavy earthwork? Are they still blasting with dynamite? So there's multiple people across the border that are out today who are going to be documenting this, because I think that we could plead the case that if they continue to blast with dynamite, if they continue to carve bulldozers into the Patagonia Mountains after the stop work order, that's a pretty strong case that they're not really complying very well with the spirit of the law. So anyways, this is I'm going to be kind of operating on the fly here. Emily contacted me late yesterday afternoon and asked if I'd present on this, so I don't have a formal presentation together, but I'm just going to start off with some things and share screen here. Let's see, how's that going to work? There's the share screen. Desktop. Oh gosh, let's see. Am I able to share the screen, Emily?
You should be able to. We've made you a co-host.
Okay. Oh, okay, I see.
You're finding it with that button there in the middle, the green share screen button.
Okay. There we go. Oh.
And while Myles gets this up, if folks are interested in seeing the full executive order, the link has been put in the chat box, and Dinah will definitely give us some more thoughts on that. We look at a little bit more of what's going on along the borderlands. You've got it there. I see it.
Great. All right. So this happened to be up on my screen here. I'll get into this in just a moment. But what we're looking at is planet imagery, and Planet has a system of satellites that takes images on a daily basis at very high resolution. And so the particular place we're looking at here is on the west side of the Patagonia Mountains on the Tucson Project 5 Segment B, or Segment B, Project 5, right near Keno Springs, and where the Santa Cruz River re-enters the United States. So this is east of Nogales. So what you're looking at here is a big strip of earthwork that was done. And I'll put on a street label here so you can see that's the US-Mexico border. So this line that you see there is the where they've been cutting. Now, if I open up this, and you see that says January 18th. So that's just a couple days ago. Let's go back to, let's just say, January 9th. And you can see that it has not gone very far. If we go to January 2nd, You see that there's sporadic earthwork that's been done here. If you go back to right before the year started, they hadn't done very much. So in a span of about 3 weeks, they've gone about 1.5 miles up the Patagonia Mountains. And this is what it looks like. And perhaps Emily showed you some of those photos, but this is right on the, it's right on the edge of the Coronado National Forest. What you're looking at here is actually in the National Forest, and right at the end, the western end of the Patagonia Mountains unit of jaguar critical habitat. So, you know, if they had a wall, they complete this wall going 4.1 miles over the mountains towards Lochiel and the San Rafael Valley, they will effectively cut off the entire jaguar critical habitat unit. And this is happening across the border. It's happening in the Peloncillo Mountains and Guadalupe Canyon, and it's also happening further to the west from Nogales in the Pajarita Wilderness and Pajarita Mountains. And so if all of these projects are completed, they will have cut off 93% of critical habitat access in the US. And the way you need to look at that is it means that there wouldn't be exchange between Mexico and the US. It's not that, 93% of the, 800,000 acres would be impacted, but it's just that effectively that would be closed off because there would not be the ability for jaguar to go back and forth. So where they're working is on the Roosevelt Easement, and that's a 60-foot wide easement that was granted by Theodore Roosevelt. I think it was 1904, right around that time period. What I've observed with Fisher Sand and Gravel is that they are not complying with the 60-foot easement. It's really sloppy work. I've worked on a lot of big infrastructure projects throughout the West, and I've seen best practices by companies like, Bechtel and Granite Construction. This has got to be the most sloppy, lawless group of people I've ever encountered, and they're actually quite hostile too. Whenever I'm out there, they send their goon squads and security forces and harass me. And in this case, it's on public land. This is national forest land, and they're asking, what we're doing there. But anyways, aside from that, I want you to take a look down here at this drainage. Now, do you see any culverts in there? No. Do you see any erosion control structures? No. They've simply dumped all the material into the wash. Now, if they were able to, if they had to comply with any laws, like most projects, federal projects have to do, then they wouldn't be able to do this. This would be a violation of Army Corps of Engineers Section 404 regulations, because they are inhibiting washes in US waterways. So my question is, what's going to happen when we get a big rain event, possibly even tonight or over the next week, to all of these drainages that they've plowed through along the border? You can see it's just really sloppy construction. This is a brand new road that they just carved in there. They could essentially just do whatever they want to do to get this job done. I'll just whip through some of these photos here. That looks a little wider than 60 feet to me. If you go up to one of these blades, those are, I think they're 18 feet wide on a D9 Caterpillar. But even the geometry of this, you see how it's really wide here and then it gets skinny. There's no survey stakes. There's no transit markers. It's just very sloppy construction. That's looking east into the Patagonia Mountains. So that's enough of that. But what we're going to be doing is monitoring if they continue to go further, and if they continue to incur into this area any further. And we'll be doing this all along the border. I think Emily already showed you this map, but this is the section that we're looking at. The green shading is the national forest, and that's where they're carving into now. So I really hope that they stop. because the damage that they're doing now is irreversible. And then the last thing I'm going to show you are just some maps that I made recently. Throughout the whole border wall crisis, I've been mapping it as the court documents come out. And part of this was for the state of California, 19 state lawsuits. They asked me to do their GIS work for them. So as court filings came out and they would publish the coordinates or descriptions in a very sloppy fashion, by the way, I assemble this information and produce maps. So what we're looking at here with this map is the, I call it border walls of the Trump era. And I'll go over it with you. So the red hatched lines here are border wall that have been built since Trump took office. So there's 99 miles exactly from El Paso over to the corner of the Boot Heel in New Mexico that have been built of a 30-foot bollard wall. 20 miles around Santa Teresa is an 18-foot bollard wall. The north-south axis of the Boot Heel of New Mexico is still open. This is a 49-mile section that's still open. They have built 6 miles down by Antelope Wells and blasted into the Whitewater Mountains west of Antelope Wells, but they have not built wall there. But nonetheless, they have done irreversible damage to mountain ranges.
And Myles, could you just speak to, we had a question in the chat too, what the pedestrian walls are?
Okay, pedestrian walls are the walls that keep people and wildlife from passing. So these are the steel bollard walls that you saw pictures of earlier. And there's only a 4-inch gap between each bollard. Keep in mind when you hear replacement fencing, and this is across all media sources, whether you're listening to Fox News or MSNBC, they will try to diminish what Trump has done. They'll say, oh, this is replacement fencing. But there's simply no comparison between the vehicle barriers that you see or a barbed wire fence versus a 30-foot tall bollard wall with only 4-inch gaps. So always be critical of that when you hear that statement. So the bollard wall fencing keeps anything larger than a cottontail from getting through. And in the case of the San Bernardino Valley now, they have installed high intensity lighting. So there's about 400 poles with 500-watt lights every 100 meters apart. They haven't turned that on yet, but it's going to be a disaster if they do. Back to this, they have not constructed walls across the Animas Valley. Right here is the San Bernardino Valley, where they've built across the San Bernardino National Wildlife Refuge and trying to go to the New Mexico border. This will be a 25-mile section. As of yesterday, they were blasting in Guadalupe Canyon, according to John Kirk's video work. The greenish color here was existing pedestrian fencing prior to Trump. Most of this was built in about 2008. So here in the area around Naco, going over to Coronado National Memorial, there was existing fencing. There's more replacement, converting 18 to 30 in the area around the San Pedro River. And then on over Coronado National Memorial, they're building that wall. And then the disastrous sections here in the Pajarito Wilderness, right where Macho B crossed at Sycamore Canyon, this big long section of 26 miles is Fisher Sand and Gravel, part of which you saw the earthwork earlier. The yellow here is the Tohono O'odham Reservation, and they have vehicle barrier, but no wall has been built. Further to the west is Organ Pipe National Monument, and they are building from there over to Cabeza Prieta National Wildlife Refuge, and that will be mostly completed up to I'd say about 3/4 of this. And then there was existing pedestrian fencing along the Barry Goldwater Reservation bombing range. And of course, in Yuma, there was a lot of pedestrian fencing. And there was pedestrian fencing in Mexicali and Calexico, designated by this green here. However, that is being converted to the modern 30-foot bollard fencing. And then continuing on to California, the Huachuca Wilderness, with the exception of a 6-mile gap around Davies Valley area, which was excluded from border wall due to desert bighorn sheep migration concerns. However, when you go on the ground there, I think it was more a logistical concern, because this is, if you've ever driven to San Diego and right when you come out of the desert by Anza Borrego and you start heading up the mountains, it's that terrain that's incredible granite that would be a pretty heavy lift to build through there in any timely fashion. And then of course, all around Tijuana and San Diego, there has been existing pedestrian fencing for some time, which is in the state of conversion. But looking at this, the entirety of this, 3/4 of New Mexico, California, and Arizona will be walled off completely with pedestrian fencing. And the biological and evolutionary implications of that are staggering. Here's where the Sonoran pronghorn ranges, right in this area. It's going to cut off their available habitat, slice it in half, as well as everything else. And in this age of changing climate, the driest year, hottest year on record in Arizona, when animals need more space than ever to find food, water, resources, we're cutting off all of their options, a lot of them. So, we have to keep that in mind, is our desert animals range far and wide according to changing conditions, whether that be drought or fire, or in the case of jaguar and people in Central America, escaping persecution from violence and poaching and hunting, that we're really implementing the worst case solution. It is not a solution. It's just providing another impediment and a barrier. So that's about all I have. And I'll be heading out right after this call to see what's going on with the border, and we're going to be tracking this on a daily basis to see what kind of progress they're making. Fortunately, we have this satellite imagery, and going back to this again, there's December 30th. Let's just quickly go to a couple days ago, and you'll see that they have built quite a bit. So we're going to keep on tracking this, and we can do this all along the border, and to see if they are in compliance. So make sure to contact your elected officials and complain if we find that they still keep on constructing here. So with that, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you, Myles. Thanks so much for that overview, that sort of global overview of the border. I mean, I think hopefully folks are seeing this clear story of the incredible extent of construction that's happened that is really creating, severing the continent into. And I think you're hearing this story clearly from the photos Emily and Myles are showing, that this construction has really accelerated in the last few weeks even. I mean, it's just been this story of them moving as fast as they can, breaking new ground in new mountain ranges and so on. So a lot of destruction here, but we've got the change of administration, and I'm going to move to Dinah now. So we had, and I see some good questions coming in, so thanks for that, folks. Biden issued an executive order yesterday, a proclamation on the termination of emergency with respect to the southern border and redirection of funds diverted to border wall construction, which talks about putting a pause on wall construction that's been mentioned. So I want to pass it to Dinah to give us a little bit of an overview of what this executive order means, and how we can think about it in terms of keeping eyes on the ground to in these coming weeks. So Dinah, I'll let you take it.
Okay, yeah, I don't have any slides.
That's
Emily
fine.
also contacted me yesterday, but I probably wouldn't have slides anyway. Larry Fisher has already posted the text of the presidential proclamation in the chat. This is not an executive order and it's not a stop work order. And I'll explain what's in it in a minute. But I first want to acknowledge that this is the first president who has said the border wall is a failed solution, that it's a waste of money, it's not a serious policy approach, that the United States is now committed to a humane immigration system, and that we don't need a border wall from coast to coast. That's good. It's also good that the proclamation covers all of the wall, whatever the funding. There was some concern with some chatter before the proclamation was released that it was only going to apply to DoD funded stretches. And it is very clear in its intent that it covers all wall. It does repeal the National Emergency Declaration. That is good, and it's beneficial in some respects, no question about it. It's a little less important than some people may imagine, just as Trump's proclamation or designation of a national emergency was a little less important in some ways. It was very symbolic, and of course symbolism counts. So we now have the president saying, no, there's not a national emergency at the border. The truth is Trump didn't even use the national emergency provisions for the first 8 months after he signed it. He did use it to transfer in September 2019 to transfer 3.6 billion from military construction funding. He might have been able to do that anyway. That's water under the dam, thank God. But excuse me, he did use that for the military construction funding, which is funding a fair portion of the walls in Arizona. For example, all the Cabeza Prieta and Barry Goldwater walls. It also comes with its own waiver of laws, but they never actually used that. They continued to rely on the Real ID Act, which allows the Secretary of Homeland Security to waive all laws for construction and border barriers. So all of that is good. I would say, however, that the proclamation, and I know a lot of us have been chatting earlier this morning about this, and a lot of my colleagues agree with this. It really exemplifies or evidences a lack of complete information about the border wall. I have actually heard off the record that they were unable to get the contracts prior to the inauguration, which makes, unfortunately, is very plausible given all the other things they couldn't get, including troop movement issues in foreign countries. So there is a lot of contracts. There's been a lot of amendments and modifications, as Dan Millis and others on this call know. Very, very hard for us to get that information. And if they were still in that same posture, that makes it very uncomfortable. They issued 17 orders yesterday. They're issuing more today. DACA just came out, folks, for anybody who's interested in that. But there is a lot of work ahead for both the administration and us and potentially Congress as a result of this proclamation. First of all, the president is telling the agencies to stop work. Somebody asked yesterday, well, he stopped Keystone, he revoked the permit. Why couldn't he just issue the stop order for the walls? Keystone is authorized by what's called a presidential permit because it's the president that has that authority under the statute. That is not the case with the border wall contracts. So what this proclamation does is tell the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Defense, in coordination with the Office of Management and Budget, to pause the wall as soon as possible, but no later than 7 days. Lots of conversation about why the no later than 7 days. I think in part because they need to find the contracts before they actually issue the stop work orders. Hopefully they'll get those today. There's also been concern expressed, and I think Emily alluded to this, that in some areas, Guadalupe Canyon, I've heard this from the people that live there, that if they just stopped everything and pulled out, that there are some really dangerous situations, that there's things that need to be stabilized. Hopefully, if they can get a hold of the contracts right away, figure out who needs to get what order, any further time between now and those 7 days will not be utilized for new construction, which would certainly be contrary to the spirit of this proclamation. But things like stabilization, cleanup, a little bit of responsibility as they move out. The next stage under the proclamation is a 60-day assessment of the legality of the funding, particularly the transfers, and the options that the administration has with appropriated funds. So I saw a question in the chat box about, is somebody going to go to the court and get an injunction? Well, actually, we've been in court since 2008. By now, I've lost track of the number of cases. There have been so many. I used to be able to count them very easily, but and I was involved in the second one, but many, many, many court cases. The only injunctions that we have obtained have been in relationship to what we think is illegal funding transfers from the Department of Defense and the Department of Treasury to build the wall. And all of the lower courts that have heard those cases have found that to be illegal. However, the Supreme Court stayed an injunction a number of months ago. The Supreme Court is actually scheduled to hear one of those cases dealing with what's called 284 money, the counter drug fund money, in the first week of February. It will be interesting to see. I anticipate, frankly, and I certainly hope, that the administration will file papers withdrawing their appeal. They're the ones who are appealing the lower court decisions that rule those transfers illegal. But we don't know that yet. So watch that space. There have been a number of lawsuits about the Real ID Act authorization to waive all laws. Unfortunately, all those have failed. So other things this proclamation does or doesn't do. It does not deal with rescinding the waivers of law. And that's something that I'm sure many of us will be raising with the administration soon. The administration, of course, can't repeal the authorization. That's something Congress has to do, and they should do. But the administration was never, ever, any administration was never required to use the waiver of laws. And in fact, in the Clinton administration, we declined to use the precursor to what is currently the broadest waiver of law in American history. So the administration could, the Secretary of Homeland Security could actually rescind all of the waivers that have been issued since 2008. There's 32 of them covering 84 laws. That's another little footnote complication here. I said Secretary of Homeland Security. Unfortunately, his nomination has been held up. It was held up the day before the inaugural, specifically over the border wall or border security at the southern border, with the senator from Missouri, who also was fighting against the Electoral College certification, painting a picture of horrific violence about to occur at the southern border. So that's something the administration is going to have to deal with. And I was frankly quite pleased that they went ahead and issued this proclamation, even in the face of that hold, which they are going to have to deal with to get any nominee confirmed for to be Secretary of Homeland Security. But it will be to our benefit, frankly, I think, to have a secretary in there who can rescind the waivers. Another thing that the proclamation doesn't deal with are the eminent domain cases. This is much more relevant to Texas than Arizona, but just briefly, just as the border wall construction has been going as fast as possible, as Myles and Emily and Louise indicated, the filings to take private property in Texas to build the wall where the wall is set back a mile or two have also been going with great speed. And those need to stop. President Biden, or President-elect Biden, said he would stop those. This order doesn't address, the proclamation doesn't address that. I'm hoping that will happen shortly. And in the 60-day review, it tasked the Secretary of Treasury, the Attorney General, the Director of Office of Management and Budget, Homeland Security, of course, and DOD, and other appropriate executive departments and agencies with essentially figuring out what to do while the construction is paused. And I would hope that Secretary of Interior nominee Deb Haaland is confirmed as quickly as possible. I think Interior certainly needs to be involved in this. Interior is the logical agency to take the lead in restoration. Also, the Forest Service and NOAA also have role. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration have roles, but much more minor than Interior. Although here in Arizona, of course, we do have a wall in the Coronado National Forest. There is no reference to consultation with the public or communities during that 60-day period. That's another concern. The order is, I think, taken as a whole pretty clear that they are very uncomfortable with the diversion of funds from other agencies to build the wall. It is also clear that they are less clear, so to speak, about what their options are in terms of the directly appropriated funds for the wall. Most of that went to the Rio Grande Valley, but those folks have a lot to think about today. There are a number of us, including a number of lawyers, who are trying to parse through exactly what the options are and who will be talking to Hill staff or are talking to Hill staff today. For the fiscal year 2021 funding that was just passed by Congress in December to avert government shutdown, fortunately, the language is the most flexible that we have seen. It talks about it appropriates another $1.375 billion for a border barrier system. Now, that can mean a lot of things. And so far, we haven't come across anybody on the Hill who thinks it couldn't mean vehicle barriers. Trump, of course, used border wall money to take down the 18-foot wall, put up the 30-foot monster. I'm really interested in the possibility personally of seeing that money used to take down the 30-foot monster and putting up vehicle barrier in those places. Another possibility is rescission of the funds, but we had heard earlier that there were going to be contracts let yesterday morning before noon. I haven't had time to check that out and see if that actually happened. So that will make a difference on that, but at least the language is much more flexible. For the contracts that were funded in fiscal years FY 18 and 19, that's going to be where we're really going to need to do some analysis. One interesting thing about the president's proclamation is that it defines walls, essentially consistent with the way the Trump order did, defines a wall meaning a contiguous physical wall or other similar secure, contiguous, and impassable physical barrier. The first thing this brings to my mind about the issue of past funding is, as I recall, and going to be doing a lot more work on this in the next few hours, all of the earlier appropriations use the term fencing. In fact, I always used to hate that because I don't consider a 30-foot what's going up now, or even the 18-footer, as a fence. I always thought of it as a wall. So I remember being really irritated that they kept calling it fencing, but it might actually work in our favor at this point in time in terms of what can be done with that money. So there'll be a lot of conversations between attorneys for public interest groups, with congressional staff, with congressional members. Congressman Kirkpatrick in Arizona, I know, was very instrumental in getting the greater flexibility for border barrier systems. Congressman Grijalva, of course, has been opposed to the wall and the waiver of laws from the very beginning, and has every year introduced bills to repeal the waiver of laws and stop the wall. So we've got a good delegation here in Southern Arizona that hopefully can help us work through these issues. And we'll also be certainly trying to make contact with the new agency folks as they try to find their offices, get on their new computer programs and find the contracts and get to work. But that's about as far as I can go now, because we're still literally working through this.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dinah. And I really appreciate you setting us straight on the presidential proclamation and what it actually means. Do you have any thoughts on the 7-day grace period, and just for us thinking about keeping eyes on the ground? And
oh, I think that's tremendously valuable. I mean, again, I don't know that it's true in every place, but I heard a pretty poignant plea recently from the family that has the ranch in Guadalupe Canyon, saying, if they just literally turn their machines around and drive out, we've got a big problem, because there's things that are really dangerous that need to be stabilized. So I also heard recently about concerns over in the western portion of Arizona that, and I had not known this before, that the Corps of Engineers was in the process of spending $4,700 to buy some habitat for the flat-tailed horned lizard, and that this particular land manager was concerned that that transaction conclude before they, while they still had the funds. And so there may be a few specific things that need to be done on a contract by contract basis, but none of that should be building new roads, pouring cement, pumping water, let alone putting up wall. So I think it's absolutely critical that we know what's going on, and then we make that known as widely as possible and as specifically as much as we can to the administration.
Great, wonderful.
And can I jump in for a second, Louise? I just wanted on that point. So what our staff is going to be doing, and what we'd ask if you are along the border and you see construction, if you're seeing what looks like border construction, what's helpful right now is to document the place, the date, the time, the activity observed, and photograph it.
Absolutely.
And send that to me, send it to Myles, send it to Louise. We're going to be consolidating all of this into a record of what's being observed. So I think it's just really critical to have those pieces of information, and I'll type that into the chat.
Yeah, that's very important. And just a technical tip, all smartphones have GPSs in them. So if you take a photograph, unless you have the location services off, which most people don't, it puts the latitude, longitude in there. However, if you text it, put it in multimedia message, social media, Facebook, Twitter, it removes that GPS information. All the EXIF information is gone. So if you want to share this with any of us, email the photo in full resolution from your phone. Don't worry if it's 4 or 5 megabytes, doesn't matter. That preserves all the location and time information, so that way we can get an exact coordinate of where you're observing.
Cool, I didn't know that.
Yeah, thanks, Myles. That's a good tip. We'll have to get a little best practices document together. We did have a question, and you touched on the Real ID Act, Dinah. We did have a question in the chat about, I guess, prospects of the repeal of the Real ID Act. And I don't know if you can speak to that at this point, but maybe just speaking a little bit to the importance of keeping that in the picture.
It's very important. I mean, clearly the quickest thing they could do, which the administration could do, which I think they should do right away. Having said that, I know they've got dozens more orders and proclamations that they're rolling out, but we're going to want them to rescind again all of those current waivers, which they can do. There was never any legal requirement to waive anything. It was just an option for the DHS secretary. That's why I'm very concerned about getting the DHS secretary confirmed. There is a senior civil servant who is an acting role. There have been many challenges to what acting people have been done recently. This acting is probably more secure legally, because obviously it's necessary to have actings for all the departments right after an inauguration. But nonetheless, I think it'll be good to get a secretary in there who is willing to, take kind of dramatic action, and that would be very, very important. In terms of repealing the Real ID Act waiver, that is, I mean, even if the Biden administration rescinded all the waivers and swore on all the Bibles they used yesterday never to use them, we want it repealed because we never want another administration to be able to use this. So I have not seen the immigration bill that has been developed by the Biden administration. I think some of our colleagues in the that work directly on immigration issues may have a better sense of whether or not it carries that. If not, I think there's members of Congress that hopefully would introduce that as an amendment. It's going to be very controversial, of course, to pass it. Congress is narrowly divided. And if the immigration bill doesn't end up passing right away, maybe there's another vehicle, for example, DHS appropriations, which of course has to happen every year. So I think we need to work very, very hard for that. Again, this waives all laws, not just federal environmental laws. It waives, the secretary can waive any law. So recently we've had all the procurement, all the contracting laws waived, so much for your taxpayers' money, all the laws protecting Native Americans, indigenous sites, sacred sites, et cetera. They could waive the Civil Rights Act. They haven't, fortunately, but they could. So we definitely need to get rid of it.
Great, thank you for that. We did have one question about the ecological impacts of the lighting. I think it was more along the lines of just trying to get that information to the Biden administration. I mean, I think it's well documented. Part of the challenge is that the administration has not been, the previous administration has not been utilizing science and considering these things. But yes, there's definitely, as Myles mentioned, that's a very serious threat to bats and other animals that are sensitive to light, and just as part of the entire infrastructure that's very damaging to these ecosystems and destructive for wildlife, that we need to work on either not getting turned on and or getting out. I'm trying to think, Emily, have you seen any other questions here that we need to address or pose to the panel? Any further questions?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. So one question that's come up is how can we make this discussion available? We will have this up on our website in our Sky Island Alliance library, hopefully within a couple of hours. We also will have a blog post up today focusing on the policy piece that Dinah has shared, including a clip of her great insight today. The other thing that I've seen popping up in questions is just how do all these, all of us want to do something right now, like go down there and stabilize the slopes and plant trees and do all that. And how can we begin to do this? What's really important at this time is we make sure that we're working kind of boots up, but really top down. We really have to make sure we're figuring out how we're going to stop construction first and create a successful framework for restoration. What Sky Island Alliance approaches to do is to be working with many other NGO partners, mobilizing volunteers, and working with the land management agencies whose lands have been affected in the weeks and months ahead to plan ahead for restoration. Hopefully there will be new sources of funding and resourcing to help pay for this restoration work. But one of the most important things we can do is be very clear and unified around where the most important places are to act immediately, and making sure that our land management agencies get the resources that they need to be successful. So we're working all the documentation that's being done by Wildlands Network, Sky Island Alliance, and our partners is going to help us with that more detailed planning effort. And soon as we have safe and responsible access to these construction sites, helping to document on the ground where the activities are necessary to revegetate, stabilize slopes, reconnect habitat, do whatever we can to start to heal the damage that's been done. So I wish I had a satisfying answer, show up on this day and time and we're going to be planting oak trees. We're going to get to that point. But right now it's very much reconnaissance. It's being vigilant with our work on the ground, coordinating very well with all of us that care about these borderlands. And this policy piece is really like front and center. One of the other asks that I would have for everyone is really critical that non-border states participate in this policy and advocacy moment. It's so important that we have elected officials, and the Biden administration is hearing from other states around the country. So if you're not from Arizona, if you feel comfortable and are motivated to share with your friends and family, please make sure that people understand that the border wall isn't over just because that proclamation came out. We have so much to do. So please help us spread the word.
Yeah, thank you, Emily.
Can
And
I show one more photo just real quick?
we're right at 10:30.
Yeah.
Super quick. And while you pull that up,
That's
or do you have it up? Let's see. Nope.
it's right here.
There you go. Yep.
So this, just to show you the lighting, this is the San Bernardino Valley. You're looking at about a 10-mile stretch between there and Guadalupe Canyon. The white scarring you see that resembles a mine, well, that's where they're blasting. They are literally taking the tops off the Peloncillo Mountains right there. That's jaguar critical habitat. But I just wanted to show you this photo so you can see the impact of the lighting, that is a heavy duty thing. And that's a ask that I think we can make, is just don't turn on the lights. That's
Great.
all I have.
Thank you, Myles. Yeah, well, I just want to say a really heartfelt thank you to Myles and Dinah for joining on short notice. We really appreciate you bringing your expertise to this conversation. And there's a much larger coalition of many different organizations that have been working to try to stop this wall and these bad policies that we've been talking about for many years. And so the success of yesterday, this first step forward with the presidential proclamation just deserves huge thanks to everyone who's been pouring so much work and effort into stopping this horrendous wall for these last many years. And there's much more in front of us to do, as Emily said. As executive director, it's my duty to say that we are redirecting staff time to do this work. And if you are able to support us financially, we would love your support. We're really very serious about organizing volunteers and getting staff on the ground in these critical few weeks coming up to make sure that construction is actually stopping, and we're getting really clear about really vital places to start doing immediate emergency kind of stabilization work. I think, oh, Dinah, yes. I see your hand up.
Breaking news.
Oh, yes. Okay.
Not good news from the border. A friend of mine is at the border in Sassabee, just spoke with the supervisor at Fisher on that site. And he said water will, quote, continue to be pumped as needed until the project is stopped. I asked when that would be, and he said, quote, in about a week. So it sounds like they're assuming that stop work order isn't, gonna be effective until day 7. I hope he's wrong. I mean, I think there is the reasonable chance that he's wrong. I think they were giving themselves time to actually, again, get contracts, do the stop work orders by somebody authorized to do that at DHS and DOD. But that's the attitude of at least one contractor. So I just wanted to share that.
Thank you. Yeah.
So thanks everybody who's going down to the border to record all that.
And we'll follow up with additional information on our listserv about ways you can take action and get at this information about how you can help monitor, like we've been talking about today. And then I think that's it on the border wall front. We do have another coffee break next week focused on Aravaipa Canyon, a much happier story where we're removing invasive vinca and bringing back lots of native plants and increasing diversity there, which is wonderful. Anything else, Emily, before we wrap up?
I think that's it. And thank you all for spending your time to care about the borderlands. And I hope this is a big year of change for the better.
We'll do our best to make it so. All right. Thank you all. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and we will definitely be in touch.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Dinah. Thank you, Myles.